Okay, why don't people during the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago not realize that plants are bad for health and go back to the old ways of hunting? Um, it was a gradual thing. So let me put it this way. We started playing around with plants about, was it, I'm trying to remember now. The initial stage was about 8,000 or 10, close to 10,000 BC. That's about nearly 12,000 years. And that's towards after when we started coming into the warm period after the glaciation periods, because you had a reglaciation about, I think it was in 11,600 years. And then there was another big flooding event, and that sort of reducing down to 11,300 or about that. And then after that, it's sort of the amount of vegetation on the planet increased quite a bit, and humans started consuming some vegetation because they could access it now in seasonal vegetation. So also the animals were leaning out. So as the animals leaned out, it meant you really struggled to get enough fat, enough energy. So, and remember, the human population had exploded globally, and it spread out around the world. They'd hunted a lot of the megafauna, and as a consequence, the pickings started declining. And this is the reason why they think that because humans were much more successful hunters compared to the Denisovans, Neanderthals, and all that, it wasn't that they were genocided by us, but they just died out because they just couldn't compete. As animals lean out, I'll give you an example with the Neanderthals. The last group of Neanderthals was actually found um, in some caves in Portugal, I believe it was Portugal or Spain, on the Atlantic coast. And these people were in really bad state. They had very poor oral health as well. They, unlike their previous ancestors that were consuming a lot of big animals, they were starting to eat acorns and a whole lot of plants and all that because they were starving. And the biggest problem, because Neanderthals are very stocky, large and stocky, they don't have high speed. We're midday persistent hunters. That means we can move very fast, like on the plains of Africa. So as midday persistent hunters, we were much more suited to hunt animals that move faster. And when animals start losing more of their body fat and leaning out, they end up becoming more mobile, more faster. And that's the animals that actually are left when you've actually overgrown your environment, killed most of the larger, slower animals. And then, those who can't keep up with the game, with the hunt, are going to pay for it. And that's what I believe why these other sort of species of the genus Homo actually died out. Humans, on the other hand, had the advantage of being midday persistent hunters from Africa, and so they were able to. But even they, in the long run, and we see it even with tribal people in Africa, they will have seasonal fruit, seasonal tubers, because animals are just too lean. And if they don't have those foods to engage the Randall cycle, and this is why people have looked at some of the old bones and some of the actual historical evidence, and that humans live much longer. Now, yes, some of these people can still live very long lives, but they don't live as long as some of the ancestral information shows that the potential to live up to 150 at least. So what we've realized is that humans have lost, even tribal people have lost some of these advantages in that regard. They're not as big. I mean, in some cases, the Maasai are actually even taller because they have animal fats like from dairy, saturated fats, additional fats, and additional nutrition which gives them a bigger advantage than than basically the Hudsons or populations like that. So it's quite clear that the amount of mass intake or the amount of food intake does play an important role in especially when it comes to protein and fat, to those sort of sources. And so as tribal populations lost some of those advantages, the ones that survived were the ones that could actually utilize some of these plants. As they started utilizing some of these plants, it became more and more over time. It was a slow thing. But even with agriculture, you've got about 5,000 years ago is when, 5,000 BC, which is about 7,500 years ago, more give or take, that we noticed the first sort of domestication of certain plants. But it doesn't really take off. It's still, these people still hunt, they still fish, and they've got a bit of plants on the side that they're producing or cultivating by just spreading the seeds, and it's sort of more like a horticultural type approach. And then eventually that sort of ramps up a bit over time, very slowly, very gradually over thousands of years. And people don't even realize they're shifting without even realize. I mean, let me put it this way, Stefan. Do you remember what your grandparents ate? And that's only 2 generations back. Do you remember what people were eating in the 60s? They were eating organ meats in Australia, and they were eating a lot of other things. The diet was 2/3 animal food. I mean, most modern people today would have no idea what people ate. Just a couple of, so you can lose what is called cultural knowledge over time. And as cultural knowledge declines, people slowly shift into other eating practices. So that's how it sort of happened. It's g'day, Lukey.
Hello, Harry. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, and so the cultural knowledge as it shifts, that cultural knowledge is also food related as well. How people prepare foods, how people eat foods, and what foods they eat becomes intertwined with their culture, around the world. And so that's how slowly, insidiously, we get this shift. It's not that these people, I mean, if it was dramatic, we would notice, but it happens slowly and gradually. It's like now, since the 60s to here, where we've gone from 2/3 animal foods in Western Europe and North America to down to 20% or a third for some of animal foods, and mostly plant. We're mostly plant-based now. We made that shift within 50 odd years. Hasn't been noticed whatsoever. Most people think young people think this is the way we've been eating forever. That's how it happens. Let alone in a time when you had no internet, nothing to look back at anything. It was just, this is it what your parents are doing? This is what I do. And then I would just do a bit more in the next generation and not even notice a shift. It's a bit like that, unfortunately. That's how it sort of happens. So that's a long-winded sort of. I should make a video on it, or the Sopranos clip thing will probably make a video on it, covering exactly what I just said there.